Guns are not dangerous. People are, by their intentions. This is not an assault weapon, but rather one to defend. I like to call it the equalizer. This episode is brought to you by the Firearm Training Institute Limited. And most firearm education start with safety, understanding to treat every gun as though it is loaded. Never point your muzzle in a direction that you don't want to shoot. However, I choose to start with terminology. What good is safety if you do not understand the terms being used? Sight alignment is when the tip of the front sight post is centered in the rear sight aperture. Defense against flanking attack. Most guns, be it shotgun, handgun, rifle, most firearms, there are commonalities. For example, the orange strip, that's the muzzle. That's the hole from the barrel in which the bullet exits. And then this little switch right here, you call it the trigger. In front of that is the trigger guard. This is what you will call a magazine. On top here is what you will call the barrel. What most consider the bullet is really the cartridge, a round or a shell. The cartridge has different parts. The tip is the bullet or the projectile, and this will shoot out of the casing. The casing is that other part right behind the bullet. And at the back, you'll see a circle that is the primer. So sometimes you hear persons referring to the caliber. The caliber is the diameter of a bullet. Remember, never point your weapon at anyone unless you are intending to use it. I am in the lobby of the Firearms Training Institute. I love the decor, and you know black is my favorite color. However, there are several myths as well as misconceptions as it relates to firearms and firearms users' license. What happens if you are in breach of such? So I'm going to create some scenarios. For example, another misconception, several persons think that if you have a firearm user license, you have a license to kill. Is that so? And how about if you have a firearm user's license and I have a firearm user's license? Can we exchange our weapon? Or if you have a firearm user's license and I do not possess a firearm user's license, can I borrow your firearm? Or better yet, can I use your firearm user's license? These are many questions, real life scenario that persons may find themselves in. And such consequences may lead to both fine and imprisonment. So we ought to know the law. Let's go in closer. Harley Davidson?
Yep.
Well, in a first world country now, nice bike, man.
Thank you.
But a nice gun too, I can get to use it.
See my gun?
Yeah.
That's a no-no.
That's looking real cool.
That's a no-no.
Why, sir?
Because that would mean that's transferring a gun to an unlicensed firearm person.
I'm a license in the car. I could go for it now, you know.
What license?
I'm a driver's license in the car.
This is a joke, boy. If you don't have a firearm license, you cannot have a firearm.
These are some pertinent questions that we need to ask and we need answers for. And who better to answer it than the director of the Firearm Training Institute, Miss Nairi Alfonso, who is also a senior attorney. Ms. Alfonso, I see the law book is out, so we're getting heavy today on this episode.
Yes, we want to familiarize members of the, well, not members of the public, but persons who are licensed to carry firearms, people who are thinking of applying for firearms, people who have applied for firearms. We want to alert them to the fact that we have a legislative regime which has been enhanced within the last 2 years in terms of what the penalties are for breaching the Firearms Act. So we want to spend today just telling legal firearm holders and users what they must look out for, what they should be cautious about, and I think that's very, very important. So you know what you're buying into if you're now doing the application.
Ms. Alfonso, in terms of Section 9.1, which says that, like yourself, a firearm dealer, somebody should come in who do not own a FUL license and is not exempted. What should happen? Oh, pleasant day, sir.
Good day.
How are you today?
I'm good, and you?
Well, I'm glad to see you because I would like to buy a gun, but I don't have a license.
You want to buy a gun? Do you have a license?
No, I don't.
Remember, folks, in a situation like this, you cannot purchase a firearm unless you're the holder of an FUL that you've applied for and been granted by the Commissioner of Police.
Well, would you like to get an application form and we could guide you on how you can do the application?
I will look forward to doing that. Yes, that sounds like a plan. Yes.
Okay, sure. Would you have a seat?
If you're desirous of applying for a firearms user's license, there's a process which must be followed. And that process involves an application which is supported by a number of documentation. It is illegal to own to have in your possession a firearm unless you're the owner of an FUL or an FUC. And the process will be explained further now.
So you want to do an application for a firearm user's license?
Yes, sir.
So we have 2 stages on which we have to go through. Firstly, we have to fill out the provisional application form, and then you do the firearm user's license form. These are the 2 forms here. I'm going to give you a listing of documents that you have to get for us so we can attach to your application forms. All right, and these are passport photographs, any 2 copies of your ID, driver's permit or passport, any 2 copies with your current address on the driver's license, a letter from your wife if you are married, or if you live with your parents, a letter from your parents agreeing to the application. Also, you have to get that person's IDs also. Okay? And you have to get proof of address like a utility bill in your name, and a certificate of character where you go to your district police station and access that. You do an eye test, a medical certificate of fitness, and a psychological report. You go to a psychologist and they will give that to you. I could recommend a number of people that you can use depending on the area you live. Okay, and in addition to that, you have to get a reference letter from your bankers. They don't need to know how much money you have, they just want to know that you have an account with them and you're a good client.
Understood.
All right, and then your business registration, your VAT registration, and any document you feel might assist in the application process.
Understood.
Right? After filling out these forms, we will have it delivered to the firearms office for processing, and it's in the hands of the police after that. Bear in mind, while we engage in assisting you in preparing your application, we do not guarantee you get a firearm. Okay? The sole person who issues firearm is the Commissioner of Police. All right? So keep that in mind. We do not give you a guaranteed getting a firearm. All we can do is to guide you and assist you in following the process. Okay? So here you are.
Thank you very much. This is a wealth of information. I will get these things and get back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
There is the fine of the 500,000 if convicted, as well as 10 years imprisonment.
Yes.
How can we go from the 10 years to up to 25 years imprisonment?
Well, the legislation, when it was amended in 2019, contemplated repeat offenders. So when you hit the offenses within the legislation that deal with essentially first offense, which might be a summary conviction, second offense, which will be an indictment, you go up 20, 25. In fact, there are penalties up to life imprisonment for breaches of the Firearms Act. And just to simplify, summary conviction is in the magistrate's court, indictment is in the high court, right? So as I said, we have fines running from $500,000, $25,000 to $1 million, and penalties running up to life imprisonment. And just to alert people, we are not necessarily talking of people who we think are members of the criminal element. We are thinking of people who are firearm holders. So, as you said, Section 9(1), if you transfer a firearm to somebody who is not the owner of a firearm license or a user's license, then you are committing an offense. Of course, the other person is committing an offense as well. So we have created an offense of transferring or giving somebody here. You did in the earlier part mention if somebody comes here and they don't have a firearm and you hand them your firearm because you came with them, well, both of you are guilty of an offense. And again, the penalties are very extravagant. We moved from penalties of like $10,000 and
$5,000 to $500,000.
Yes, because the original legislation.
I almost thought it was pesos they were talking about initially.
Well, the original legislation was 1970.
Yes. So, Alfonso, I have another question as it relates to Section 11(1), which states that if a person discharges a firearm 40 meters away from a public road what are the fines? If it's the same 500,000, how many years imprisonment?
Well, on summary.
Because you know we are in Trinidad. I mean, now it's COVID, there's no party.
But I mean, you're quite correct. It's not unknown for things like independence as well as New Year's. The people will discharge illegal firearms. I'll deal with the people that I have some familiarity with, which is illegal firearm holders. That was a relatively minor offense, discharging your weapon in a public place within 40 meters of a public road and so on. Those are relatively minor offenses in the original legislation. In 2019, on a summary conviction before the magistrate's court, the fine increased to $500,000 and imprisonment for 10 years.
So ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to discharging your firearm, legally the only time you should discharge your firearm is when you're in defense of life and self and family. Discharging the firearm in public is a major no-no. That's considered brandishing and endangering the public. You have to understand that the minute a round or a projectile leaves that muzzle, you've bought what damage that projectile can create. Because that round has enough energy and force to keep traveling until it hits something, which we consider a backstop. But it may not also just hit something, it may hit someone. So that's why it's important when you do discharge your firearm for the purposes of training that you do it in a controlled, licensed environment, such as a licensed, legal gun range. Training is very valuable, and it allows you to do this.
But there are facilities for that. Like here, I see there's the firearms range facility where they can come and practice, because sometimes you have a tool and they're so trigger happy. They want to use this tool, all well and good, but channel it in the right way.
Well, again, I said I'm a serious advocate of safety. I said this may seem to be not a very pernicious part of the law, and fairly mundane, but as I said, it has the potential to lose somebody's life. And we've had a number of cases reported over the years of people, whether it's the criminal element and up in some hill and the bullet gone through a wall and gone through a window and injure or kill somebody. So it is dangerous.
Yes, it is.
So, and again, these offenses we are focusing on that legal firearm owners must familiarize themselves with and must be cautious that you are now subjecting yourself by getting a firearm. It's also good and well to say I have a firearm. Right?
But it comes with a certain amount
burdens,
of
burdens and obligations and responsibilities which you have to take on board, not after you've acquired the firearm, but certainly before you even contemplate.
Yeah, because this is not Trinidad is not the Wild West, right?
No, and again, our culture and our legislation is not a permissive one. Like the United States, where said people will have many different firearms, many different types of firearms, high-powered firearms, as the case may be. We still have a restrictive approach to firearm ownership, much like United Kingdom, much like other countries in Europe and so on. So there are countries where they're more permissive and countries where they're less permissive.
Based on Section 6.2 of the Law of Trinidad and Tobago, which says that there are certain exemptions, Mr. Alfonso. I know about the police officers and defense force, but who else are exempted from a FUL or FUEC?
Prison officers, the director of the Forensic Science Center in Federation Park, and his designated officers. Those persons are not required to apply for an FUEC or an FUL. And
I like how the law holds these users accountable. For those persons who are watching the program and who are in possession of a firearm user's license, however, if they were guilty of domestic violence, and within reason, Mr. Alfonso, they can be discharged from their FUL license, but for what period of time?
Well, the commissioner has the power to suspend the FUL or the FUEC for a period of 5 years. And if it is that you have been convicted of a domestic violence offense and you wish to apply, the period of your suspension starts or ends 5 years after your conviction.
So such a person will fall under the category of being a restricted person?
For the time being, yes. Yes. So in that 5 year period, yes, they will be a restricted person.
And is that also applicable to applicants who are applying for a firearm user's license, but may have been involved in some acts of domestic violence? Would that be a hindrance?
It would in fact be a hindrance, because you would be on a 5 year suspension, meaning that you could not be a restricted person as the term that you use. That's correct, a restricted person for those 5 years from the date of conviction to the date of application. And that dovetails into when you're making your application, you must get the consent of your spouse.
And who better to know you than that person to know?
Well, I'm pretty certain that if you were, had been abused by your spouse or your common law, as the case may be, you may not give your permission for that person to now arm themselves. Thereby domestic violence could be escalated to another level.
Mr. Alfonso, with the climate now in Trinidad and Tobago and with the amount of firearms that is coming through our back door and persons that are not firearm dealers that are selling firearms to non-firearm FUL holders, what the law states for such persons?
Well, I mean, the highest penalties prescribed by the Firearms Amendment Act of 2019 apply to that. So, they apply to trafficking. So if you have more than 2 guns in your possession which are illegal, you're deemed to be trafficking. Again, we call these strict liability offenses, meaning I don't have to prove a whole lot as the police. I found you with 2 guns, good, trafficking, right? It's the same thing with drugs. I find you with this quantity of drugs, then you're trafficking.
Yeah, correct.
Right? I find you this quantity of drugs in the vicinity of a school. That's another layer above there, right? I don't practice criminal law, but what little I know, I know that's true.
What little?
What little I know, that's true. So the highest penalties with life imprisonment, $1 million fine, apply to trafficking, apply to transferring a weapon to somebody who is not giving, transferring, selling, giving somebody a firearm, a legal firearm, knowing that they're going to commit a crime.
As the law says, Mr. Alfonso, based on Section 28(1), losing a gun by negligence. Now, that's 100,000 for memory loss.
Yeah.
Or leaving your gun probably, as you said, in a toilet tank or in your vehicle, and somebody breaks in your vehicle and sees your gun. Is that the same thing? Would that also apply?
Yes, that would qualify as an offense under 28(1). It's actually a unique section in our legislation. Generally, if you're a victim of crime in our country, and any country for that matter, you are not yourself up for prosecution, but this is a unique part of the act. So you will be a victim of crime because somebody has stolen the firearm and hidden it somewhere and taken it home or whatever
And
it
there's
is.
still a fine for negligence.
But losing gun by negligence, the offense is neatly described as losing gun by negligence, and it means in negligent circumstances losing your firearm. Right? So the criminal court is penalizing you for your negligence. Now, it does seem harsh. I said as I told you, the original fine in the legislation was $5,000. It's moved up, how many mathematically points upwards,
Exponential.
Right? Exponential.
The algorithm is exponential.
Right? And I mean, one has to look at it, if you look at it in a clinical way, one has to accept that, listen, if your firearm is stolen from your car, somebody breaks your car glass, just the way they break your car glass and take your laptop or any other property you may have there, your handbag, and they break your car glass and they take your firearm, where is that firearm going to end up? It's not going to be turned into the police. Right? It's certainly not going to be...
Or what about those persons who may say that their firearm was stolen, but they know it was given or sold to another entity?
We are not in Minority Report, that movie,
yes.
Right? So we can't really, if the police can prove that in fact you didn't lose your firearm, but you really sold it to somebody, and let's say that somebody got caught, with the firearm, a crime was detected and they got caught, well then you are back to square one. You are now facing serious penalties under the Firearms Act. You'll never see a firearm again, and most certainly you have some time to spend in jail,
yes.
Right? Somewhere between the maximum.
But Trinidadians, we find creative ways. We find a crease, a crevice, anyhow to crawl through, right? So with this aspect of the law, in terms of Section 28(1), I think it's good for persons who may have a gun and want to probably sell it to another entity or report it as stolen or report it as lost, knowing that there's a fine attached to that. Well then, you have to consider your costs.
Right. Well, I think what you're trying to do, back to the original point, burden, responsibility, obligation. So that even this non-criminal act by a firearm owner results in a penalty of up to $100,000.
Yes.
So if I put God forbid I leave my gun in my car thinking, well, look, I'm just going for 2 minutes, or I'm just running around for 3 minutes, and somebody breaks into your car and it's stolen, look at the penalty you will be facing.
Yes.
Right? Up from $5,000.
As the law says in section 27(1), in terms of persons who possess a FUL or FUEC certificate or license, they must be in possession of such, because
Yeah.
there are fines that, I mean, is 100,000 this one? 5 years imprisonment?
And 5 years, up to 5 years imprisonment.
So wait, let us understand this. So if you have a FUL license and you have a FUEC certificate, but it's not in your possession, so just say the certificate is not in my handbag at this time, so there's a roadblock in San Fernando, and I do not have this certificate in my bag at this present time, but my weapon is there, I can be fined.
Yes, that constitutes an offense under the Firearms Act, contrary to 27(1).